Mr. Chairman, I call up Amendment HEN 20547.
Clerk will distribute the amendment.
I think it's available for distribution. Is it?
It was already circulated
I think we have it electronically.
It's been distributed? Good. This amendment expresses the sense of the committee regarding the constitutional rights of American citizens to peaceably assemble.
You need to
On June the 1st, we witnessed an extraordinary and outrageous act here in our nation's capital.
Okay.
Federal law enforcement attacked peaceful demonstrators outside the White House. Some say it was tear gas, others say pepper gas, but they were gassed and rubber bullets were shot at them at the direction of Attorney General William Barr. According to press reports, the assault began with law enforcement kneeling, not to express solidarity with anti-racism efforts, as we've seen with some police officers around the country. They were kneeling to put on gas masks to protect themselves from the weapons they were about to fire at peaceful demonstrators. As soon as that was done, the president marched from the White House across Lafayette Square to St. John's Episcopal Church. The Attorney General, the Secretary of Defense, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff all followed. It was a rare display of the might of the American government. What was the battleground that drew this show of force? The gathering, the peaceful gathering of Americans raising their voices, asking this country to stop racism. Unfortunately, these peaceful demonstrators got in the way, in the path of the president on his way to a photo op. Attorney General Barr said he wanted to, quote, dominate the streets, close quote, and he redirected personnel from the FBI, the Bureau of Prisons, the U.S. Marshal Service, the ATF, ICE, the Border Patrol, TSA, and other agencies away from their normal duties to participate in this attack on Lafayette Square. Listen to what former Defense Secretary Jim Mattis said about this action. Quote, "We know we are better than the abuse of executive authority that we witnessed in Lafayette Square. We must reject and hold accountable those in office who would make a mockery of our Constitution." At this critical moment in our nation's history, one would expect the United States Senate Judiciary Committee to consider this measure, to stand up and speak up, to exercise our oversight duties over the Attorney General and the Department of Justice, to examine why lawful protesters engaged in their First Amendment rights were attacked by federal law enforcement officers, to discuss the pervasive systemic racism, the incidents of police brutality, and the ongoing fight in this country for civil rights. These issues go to the heart of this committee's jurisdiction. Instead, as we've learned, the chairman and majority are determined that this historic, distinguished committee will instead focus on the Mueller investigation into Russia's 2016 election interference. The streets of America and the world are afire, figuratively, with the passion people feel for justice. We are in the midst of a pandemic. We know full well the state of the economy. And yet, we are going to do the bidding of the president to consider an issue which may be of some value to him in his reelection campaign. Mr. Chairman, it's time to get back to basics. You said yourself, someone needs to be held accountable. I offer this amendment to your motion in the hope that we can return to the conversation and the committee's attention to the very real issues our country is facing. At the very least, we should go on record in defense of the constitutional rights of all Americans to peaceably assemble and express our disapproval with Attorney General Barr's actions.
Senator Durbin.
Mr. Chairman, I call up Amendment HEN 20516. This amendment authorizes and directs the chairman, after consulting with the ranking member, to issue a subpoena for documents, communications, and testimony from Michael Cohen regarding the matters in the chairman's investigation. 2016, Cohen was vice president in the Trump organization and a personal attorney to candidate Trump. Cohen was heavily involved in the efforts to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, for which candidate Trump had signed a letter of intent in the fall of 2015. According to the Mueller report, From September 2015 to June 2016, Cohen pursued the Trump Tower Moscow project on behalf of the Trump Organization and had briefed candidate Trump on the project numerous times. That statement to be found in Volume 2, page 6 of the Mueller report. In January 2016, Cohen communicated with the office of Dmitry Peskov, Putin's Deputy Chief of Staff and Press Secretary, regarding the Trump Tower Moscow project. Also, according to the Mueller report, quote, during the summer of 2016, Cohen recalled that candidate Trump publicly claimed that he had nothing to do with Russia, and then shortly afterwards privately checked with Cohen about the status of the Trump Tower Moscow project. Mueller report, Volume 2, page 137. Mr. Cohen has pled guilty to fraud, to making false statements to Congress about the duration and extent of his work on the Trump Tower Moscow project. He's currently serving his sentence in home confinement, but we could certainly seek his testimony, even remotely. I believe if this committee is going to reinvestigate whether Crossfire Hurricane and the Mueller investigation were factually predicated, why would you not call Michael Cohen? Remember what the Attorney General said about the Mueller report and the investigation? Utterly baseless, his words, utterly baseless. We have given you opportunities and will continue to this morning to bring in relevant witnesses. The fact that you are turning down every single relevant witness tells us and tells the world this is an irrelevant investigation. It is not relevant to the issues of the moment, and it certainly isn't relevant when it comes to calling material witnesses, which any normal prosecutor would call. This is stacked, my friends. You get a chance now to bring in Michael Cohen and learn what the Moscow project for Donald Trump was all about. I ask everyone to vote aye. GN 20518, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amendment authorizes and directs the chairman, after consulting with the ranking member, to issue a subpoena for documents, communications, and testimony from Rick Gates regarding the matters in the chairman's investigation. Mr. Gates was the Trump campaign deputy chairman and longtime associate of Paul Manafort, another person you don't want to hear from. According to the Mueller report, quote, Manafort instructed Rick Gates, his deputy on the campaign and a longtime employee, to provide Kalimnik, whom we've heard about before, with updates on the Trump campaign, including internal polling data. Volume 1, page 129, Mueller report. Gates did so on numerous occasions. This report notes that, quote, Gates suspected that Kalimnik was a spy, a view he shared with Manafort. Volume 1, page 134, Mueller report. Kalimnik refers to Konstantin Kalimnik, we've heard about, a Russian national who worked with Paul Manafort in Ukraine and who the FBI assessed to have ties with Russian intelligence. The Mueller report also includes a heavily redacted section discussing communications between candidate Trump and Gates about releases by WikiLeaks, including a conversation in which the report says, quote, Trump told Gates that more releases of damaging information would be coming. You can find that statement, Volume 1, page 54, Mueller report. Gates was indicted, pled guilty to make false statements and conspiracy against the United States. I believe if this committee is going to reinvestigate whether Crossfire Hurricane and the Mueller investigation were factually predicated, we naturally would like to hear from a relevant witness like Mr. Gates.
Yeah, I oppose the amendment. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Grassley.
No.
No.
Mr. Cornyn.
No by proxy.
Mr. Lee. No. Mr. Cruz. No. Mr. Snapp. No. Mr. Hawley. No. Mr. Tillis.
No by proxy.
No by proxy.
Ms. Ernst. No. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Blackburn. Mrs. Feinstein.
Aye.
Mr. Leahy.
Aye.
Mr. Durbin.
Aye.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal. Aye. Ms. Hirono.
Aye.
Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Ms. Harris. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, the votes are 10 yeas, 12 nays.
The amendment's not agreed to. Senator Durbin.
Amendment HGN 20548, George Papadopoulos. The amendment authorizes and directs the chairman, after consulting with the ranking member, to issue a subpoena for documents, communications, and testimony from George Papadopoulos regarding the matters in the chairman's investigation. Papadopoulos was a foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign in 2016. The Mueller report discusses how Papadopoulos was told on April 25, 2016, by Joseph Massoud a London-based professor with Russian ties, that the Russian government had obtained dirt on Clinton in the form of thousands of emails. Mueller Report, Volume 1, pages 80 to 95. Papadopoulos mentioned this to Australian officials on May 6, 2016, and they contacted the FBI in July 2016, prompting the FBI to open its counterintelligence investigation on July 31, 2016. Mueller Report, Volume 1, pages 81 and 1. According to the Mueller Report, during a March 31, 2016 Trump campaign meeting, Papadopoulos, quote, told the group that he had learned through his contacts in London that Putin wanted to meet with candidate Trump and that these connections could help arrange the meeting. Mueller Report, Volume 1, page 86. According to the Mueller Report, several witnesses at that meeting, quote, stated that Trump was interested and receptive to the idea of meeting with Putin. Mueller Report, Volume 1, page 86. Papadopoulos worked for several months with Mifsud and two Russian nationals to arrange a meeting between the Trump campaign and the Russian government, though the meeting did not take place. Mueller Report, Volume 1, page 6. Papadopoulos pled guilty to making false statements to the FBI about his contact with Mifsud, and he has completed his sentence. If this committee truly wants to investigate whether Crossfire Hurricane and the Mueller investigation were factually predicated as opposed to some cooked in-house political job, why wouldn't you call a relevant witness like Mr. Papadopoulos?
Mr.
For
Chairman.
2.5 years, excuse me if I may respond first. For 2.5 years, Mr. Mueller and his team looked at everything and everybody. Not one person has been prosecuted from the Trump world for colluding with the Russians. Mr. Papadopoulos got a 2-week sentence about misstating, allegedly lying about when he met a particular person. Yes.
You know, if we're going to have a hearing, we have to be allowed to produce evidence.
Yeah.
As I understand this, George Papadopoulos was a member of the Trump campaign. In July of 2016, he told an Australian official that the Russians had dirt on Hillary Clinton in the form of thousands of emails, and that they were willing to release these emails to help Trump and hurt Clinton. Australia shared this information with the FBI, which opened Crossfire Hurricane based on it. There are significant questions outstanding about how Papadopoulos learned that the Russians had Hillary Clinton's emails. So, you know, why wouldn't you want the committee to have access to this information in order to see the full extent surrounding the opening of Crossfire Hurricane? If we're going to do investigations, we have to allow people to bring in evidence. I don't understand why people would vote no on this. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, and I told you we'll have Mr. Mueller or a designee come into the committee at the appropriate time to talk about the investigation. But I want to make this really clear. All these people we're talking about had their lives turned upside down, being surveilled by their own government, on tape saying, I didn't work with any Russians, I didn't collude with the Russians, it'd be treason. So we're going to get to the system that led to all this. Mr. Mueller had plenty of time to look at these people, and we're going to start looking at the people who did the investigation. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Grassley.
No.
Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Lee.
So after this, you're doing Flynn and Corsi, right? And then that's it?
I believe so.
Okay. Bush already did kill him.
No by proxy.
There's the Cohen Stone amendment left, and the Sessions amendment from Blumenthal. They're not all framed.
I
Mr.
Those are
Leahy.
the only other ones that remain.
Mr. Durbin.
Aye.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Ask him if they're.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Coon.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono.
Aye.
Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Ms. Harris.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, the votes are 10 yeas, 12 nays.
The amendment's not agreed to. Senator Durbin, how many more do you have just for the information for the committee here?
I
Timing.
believe I have 2 left.
Okay.
Yes.
Senator
There
Durbin.
are a couple others that have been,
Okay.
maybe 3.
Okay. Senator Durbin.
Amendment HEN 20520, Michael Flynn. This amendment authorized directs the chairman, after consulting with the ranking member, to issue a subpoena for documents, communications, and testimony from Michael Flynn. General Flynn was a Trump campaign advisor in 2016, later became National Security Advisor for a brief period from January and February of 2017. In addition to his communications with the Russians during the transition, which he lied about and pled guilty to, the Mueller report discusses how after Trump had publicly invited Russia to find Hillary Clinton's deleted emails on July 27, 2016, quote, Flynn contacted multiple people in an effort to obtain the emails. Remember that? Trump said publicly that I invite the Russians to go looking for Hillary's emails, and General Flynn believed him. Flynn's contacts included Republican fundraiser Peter Smith, who claimed he was in contact with Russian hackers regarding the email. Mr. Smith committed suicide in May of 2017. Flynn has pled guilty to making false statements not once but twice regarding his communications with Russian Ambassador Kislyak during the transition period. Controversially, the Justice Department has tried to drop its prosecution, and as we all know, the matter is currently pending before D.C. District Judge Emmett Sullivan. We've talked so many times about whether General Flynn was treated properly. Why wouldn't we want him before the Senate Judiciary Committee under oath to tell his story? If this committee is truly going to reinvestigate whether Crossfire Hurricane and the Mueller investigation were factually predicated, they should hear from Michael Flynn.
I oppose the amendment. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
see what's happening here. You can have an investigation, but you won't call the witnesses. Michael Flynn was Trump's national security advisor in January and February of 2017. Later that year, he pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI about his interactions with the Russian ambassador. Last month, the Justice Department moved to dismiss his case, despite overwhelming evidence that Flynn did knowingly mislead the FBI. Why wouldn't we want him to come before a committee if we're going to do an investigation and clear this up one way or another?
We will hear from the Department of Justice about their decision. You can call any witness you would like to say that it was inappropriate, and that's what the committee will do regarding General Flynn. Opposed amendment, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Grassley?
No.
Mr. Cornyn?
No by proxy.
Mr. Lee? No. Mr. Cruz? No. Mr. Sachs? No. Mr. Hawley?
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis?
No by proxy.
Ms. Ernst? No. Mr. Trapo? Mr. Kennedy? Mrs. Blackburn? No. Mrs. Feinstein?
Aye.
Mr. Leahy? Aye. Mr. Durbin?
Aye.
Mr. Whitehouse?
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar?
Aye.
Mr. Coon?
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal? Aye. Mr. Rono? Mr. Booker? Aye. Ms. Harris?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, the votes are 10 yeas, 12 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Senator Durbin.
Mr. Chairman, Amendment HEN 20525, Jerome Corsi. The amendment authorizes and directs the chairman, after consulting with the ranking member, to issue a subpoena for documents, communications, and testimony from Jerome Corsi. In 2016, Corsi worked for the media outlet WorldNet Daily and was an associate of Roger Stone. Most of the information in the Mueller report about Corsi is redacted, but the Mueller report says that Corsi, a political commentator affiliated with the Trump campaign, quote, was involved in efforts to coordinate with WikiLeaks and Assange. Volume 2, page 128 of the Mueller report. Corsi has confirmed that he was person one in Roger Stone's indictment. The indictment discusses communications between Corsi and Stone discussing planned WikiLeaks email releases. I believe if this committee is truly going to have an honest investigation and reinvestigate whether Crossfire Hurricane and the Mueller report were factually predicated, we should hear from Mr. Corsi.
Mr. Chairman, if
Yes,
I
ma'am.
may,
Yes, ma'am.
I think Senator Durbin is absolutely correct. I don't understand how we can do an investigation if you're not going to be able to get any of the evidence. And this allows the chairman, or urges the chairman, or directs the chairman, after consulting with the ranking member, to issue a subpoena for documents and communications and testimony at a hearing or deposition related to any aforementioned matter from Jerome Corsi. I don't understand why the other side would want an investigation and yet prevent the acquisition of material.
With all due respect, I don't understand why we would want to do the Mueller investigation all over again after we spent 2.5 years and $25 million doing it. I'm sorry it didn't turn out the way people like, but it's behind us. Now we're going to look at what happened and the misconduct involved and hold people accountable. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Grassley? No. Mr. Corning?
No by proxy.
Mr. Lee? No. Mr. Drew? No. Mr. Sachs?
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley?
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillage?
No by proxy.
Ms. Ernst? No. Mr. Cravo? Mr. Kennedy? Mrs. Blackburn? No. Mrs. Feinstein?
Aye.
Mr. Leahy? Aye. Mr. Durbin?
Aye.
Mr. Whitehouse?
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar?
Aye.
Mr. Coon?
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal? Aye. Ms. Hirono? Mr. Booker? Ms. Harris?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, the votes are 10 yeas, 12 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
My last amendment of relevant witnesses the committee does not want to hear from relates HEN 20524 to Roger Stone. This amendment would authorize and direct the chairman to subpoena Roger Stone in addition to the 53 names already on the chairman's list. Stone, of course, is well known, an advisor to the Trump campaign in 2016 and a longtime associate of Paul Manafort. Much of the information in the Mueller report about Stone is redacted, but his contacts during the campaign with WikiLeaks and Russian intelligence from Guccifer 2.0 have been widely reported. Stone was convicted in 2019 of witness tampering and lying to Congress. He's expected to report to prison at the end of June. I want to go back to the point made repeatedly by Senator Feinstein. If this is on the up and up, if this is legit, you bring in witnesses who are relevant. You decide whether their testimony is credible. You put it into the record so we have a complete record. For those who agree or disagree with the investigation, you give them each an equal opportunity to come forward and produce evidence that's relevant to the investigation. To say that the investigation of Crossfire Hurricane is really the center of this, and then to ignore every predicate that led up to this investigation, is frankly to call into question whether this is a credible exercise. At one point, when we brought the name Paul Manafort before the committee, the chairman said, and I quote, he wasn't an FBI agent. If that's the standard, you're not going to have 53 witnesses. There are many people on this chairman's list that are not FBI agents. Take a look. So I would ask that Roger Stone be brought before this committee, or at least be subject to subpoena for documents and information.
Senator Feinstein, would you like to say something?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know how we can have an investigation.
Turn on.
Mike.
I don't know how we can have an investigation and not allow the collection of applicable materials. And that's exactly what Senator Durbin is asking for. The committee never interviewed or received documents from Stone, who is a key figure in the Russia investigation. Special Counsel Mueller found that Stone sought out advanced knowledge of WikiLeaks' plans to release Hillary Clinton's emails and briefed Trump on what he learned. If Chair Graham is going to insist on revisiting, the committee should hear from all individuals with relevant information. Clearly, this is relevant. If you don't allow it, you stack the hearing. I don't understand what's happening. Senator Durbin's motions are all valid, and you can be for hearing and then stop any witness from testifying. That appears to be what's going on, Senator. I'm sorry.
From my point of view, it appears that you want to talk about everything except what we should be talking about. Mr. Mueller had carte blanche authority to look at everything you've talked about, Mr. Stone, and not one person has been prosecuted for colluding with the Russians. But Comey and McCabe and that whole crowd, their day is coming. Did you know the Russian subsource disavowed the dossier? How could you not have known? What kind of system do we have at the FBI? When the most high-profile investigation of a sitting president, what kind of system is there over there? regarding investigations. How could it be possible that the people at the bottom of the basement told the case fell apart and people at the top have no idea? I don't buy that for one bit. Nobody's looked at this, but we're going to look, and we're going to go wherever the evidence takes us. Maybe it's just a system where nobody's paying attention to anything. I don't know, but I doubt it.
Mr.
I
Chairman?
oppose the request. The clerk will call the
Chairman?
roll.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Before we call the roll, if I could just say that the chairman and members on the Republican side have put at issue whether there was legitimate predication for this investigation. You've suggested that because there were errors and omissions found by Inspector General Horowitz in the warrants, that they would never have otherwise issued. And the question of whether there was adequate predication is one that you have put at issue here.
Yeah.
And if we're going to be creating a narrative here that there was no adequate predication, that this whole thing would have fallen apart completely once the warrant applications were corrected, which is what I've pursued warrant applications before. I've done wiretaps. I've been the chief law enforcement officer in my state federally. I've been the chief law enforcement officer in my state as a matter of state practice. And if I had a warrant application that contained either a false statement or material omission, what I would do, and what every responsible prosecutor would do, is send it back and get it corrected. You don't end the investigation because you get a bad warrant application. So the question of whether this was predicated is alive and well in this investigation. And the witnesses that Senator Durbin is proposing are witnesses who could support the fact that there was, in fact, predication for this investigation. And if what we're going to be doing is building a narrative that this investigation should have stopped dead as soon as the warrants went in that were wrong, as soon as Rosenstein, had he found out about it, that there should have been no Russia collusion investigation, despite all of the findings in the Mueller report that there was, in fact, Russian activity, Russian influence in this election, then we're on a very different course than if we're actually trying to get to the bottom of this. And I would submit that where your concerns and our concerns overlap is in the repeated Republican assertions that there wasn't predication to pursue the question of Russian influence. And that's why I think these are important. I just want to make that point clear.
No, I understand.
We're speaking kind of across each other,
Right.
but there is a point where they overlap. And that is, was there or was there not predication to continue even if the warrant applications had been corrected?
Sure. No, I agree. And
Okay,
so
thanks.
here's
That's
the
all.
point. That's why we're going to call somebody from the Mueller team. You come here and justify your work product. How did the situation evolve the way it did? Why did you think these people were working with the Russians to begin with? How did you miss all this stuff? Why did you run stop signs? That's very fair. They'll come. I welcome somebody from the Mueller team to come. I welcome Mr. Mueller. If he can't come, I welcome Wiseman. I am not afraid to talk to the Mueller people about what they did. I think we should. So the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Grassley?
No.
Mr. Cornyn? Mr. Lee? Mr. Cruz? Mr. Sacks?
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley?
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis?
No by proxy.
Ms. Ernst? Mr. Crapo? Mr. Kennedy? Mrs. Blackburn? Mrs. Feinstein?
Aye.
Mr. Leahy? Mr. Durbin?
Aye.
Mr. Whitehouse?
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar? Mr. Coons? Mr. Blumenthal? Mr. Rono? Mr. Booker? Ms. Harris?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, the votes are 10 yeas, 12 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Senator Blumenthal.